Before we begin, take just 2 seconds. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because stories like this aren't just history, they're reminders of what courage really looks like. And as you watch, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now imagine this. A narrow mountain pass, jagged cliffs slicing into the sky, wind howling through the rocks like a warning from the past. The air feels heavy, as if the land itself is whispering that something is coming, or something violent, something unstoppable. And at the center of it all, fewer than 60 Filipino soldiers stand their ground, preparing to face what lies ahead, knowing there is no turning back. Not hundreds, not even a few thousand, but a relentless force, an entire advancing army determined to crush everything in its path. This wasn't just a battle. This was a stand that would echo through time, where fear met courage, and ordinary men faced impossible odds. Because on December 2nd, 1899, one man made a choice. To hold the line, no matter the cost, a decision that would define a nation's spirit. They called it the Philippine Thermopylae, but what happened at Tirad Pass wasn't mythology. It was real. Blood, fear, sacrifice, and a last stand that refused to break. The year was 1899, and the Philippines stood on the edge of a brutal turning point, as war between Filipino forces and the United States intensified, and every decision carried the weight of survival. Emilio Aguinaldo was on the run, retreating northward through the rugged terrain of Luzon, moving urgently with his men as danger closed in around them. Behind him, American troops advanced relentlessly, determined to end the resistance once and for all, pushing through unforgiving terrain with discipline and force. The mountains became both refuge and trap, steep ridges, dense forests, and hidden paths that could either shield the fleeing forces or seal their fate. Among these natural defenses stood Tirad Pass, a thin corridor carved into the mountainside, so narrow that only a handful of men could pass through at a time. It was the perfect choke point, tight, unforgiving, and strategic, where a small force could delay an entire army, but only at unimaginable risk. It was here that a young general, Gregorio del Pilar, barely 24 years old, stepped forward and volunteered for a mission that most would consider a death sentence. Known for his bravery and charisma, he had already earned respect among his peers, but what he was about to do would cement his place in history forever. Gregorio del Pilar understood the situation clearly, knowing that every decision now carried the weight of an entire revolution on the brink of collapse. Emilio Aguinaldo needed time to escape, regroup, and continue the fight, because without it, everything they had fought for could disappear. And so, the plan was simple and terrifying. A small rear guard would remain behind at Tirad Pass to delay the advancing American forces for as long as possible. There would be no reinforcements, no escape routes, just a handful of soldiers standing alone in a narrow mountain pass against overwhelming odds. When Del Pilar volunteered, he didn't hesitate. He didn't ask for guarantees or question the outcome. He simply stepped forward and accepted the mission. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about sacrifice, about buying precious time with blood, courage, and an unbreakable will. As he gathered his men, around 60 in total, he chose those who understood exactly what was at stake and what they were being asked to give. These weren't just soldiers. They were men willing to stand their ground, even when the ending was already written. The journey toward Tirad Pass was grueling, with unforgiving terrain, thin air, and every step upward feeling heavier than the last as the soldiers pushed themselves forward. The harsh conditions wore on them, sweat, exhaustion, and the struggle to breathe becoming constant companions as they climbed higher into the mountains. But as they gained elevation, Gregorio del Pilar began to see the advantage they held, studying the land and recognizing its hidden strength. The pass revealed itself as a natural bottleneck, so narrow that it would force any advancing enemy into a tight, vulnerable formation. From above, the defenders could control the flow of battle, holding a position where even a small force could dictate the pace of an entire army. Del Pilar wasted no time, ordering his men to fortify their positions, digging trenches and stacking rocks to build makeshift defenses. Rifles were checked and prepared, every movement deliberate, every second counting as they readied themselves for what was coming. And beneath all the urgency, there was a quiet understanding among the men. They knew this wasn't just another fight, but their final stand. As dawn broke on December 2, 1899, the mountains above Tirad Pass seemed almost peaceful, the sky stretching wide in soft hues of morning light. The calm felt almost unreal, quiet, still, and untouched, hiding the storm that was about to unfold beneath its beauty. Somewhere below, American forces advanced step by step through the rugged terrain, slowly closing the distance toward the narrow pass. When the first signs of movement appeared, tension gripped the defenders, every eye locking onto the trail, every finger tightening around a rifle. And then the battle began as the first shots rang out, sharp and sudden, shattering the silence of the mountains. Gunfire echoed through the pass, bouncing off cliffs as chaos erupted, the peaceful dawn replaced by the violence of war. The Americans pushed forward with confidence, but quickly realized they had walked into a trap as the narrow path forced them into a vulnerable single-file advance. From above, the defenders unleashed precise, relentless fire, turning every attempt to climb into a deadly struggle. Wave after wave, American troops pushed forward along the narrow mountain path, attempting again and again to break through the defensive line. But the Filipino defenders held firm, unmoving in their positions, refusing to give ground despite the relentless pressure. From their elevated positions they had the advantage, and they used it with deadly efficiency, striking from above with precision. Rocks were sent crashing down the slopes, smashing into advancing soldiers and turning the terrain itself into a weapon. Bullets rained from above in relentless bursts, each shot carefully aimed, every movement calculated for maximum impact. The enemy, expecting an easy pursuit, found themselves stalled, trapped in a deadly climb where every inch of progress came at a cost. Gregorio del Pilar moved among his men, encouraging them, directing their fire, and ensuring that no position was left unguarded. He wasn't commanding from a distance. He stood with them in the fight, sharing the danger and the burden, and his presence strengthened their resolve to hold the line. The American forces, though stalled, were not without determination, regrouping as they realized a direct assault would cost them too much. Recognizing the danger of continued frontal attacks, they began to adapt, shifting their strategy under pressure. Scouts were sent out into the mountains, tasked with finding alternate routes, hidden paths that could outmaneuver the defenders. Moving carefully through rugged terrain, they searched the cliffs and forests until eventually they found a way through. It was a risky maneuver, climbing through dangerous, uneven ground to reach a position above the Filipino line, but one that could change everything. If successful, it would turn the tide of the battle completely, giving them the advantage they desperately needed. Meanwhile, the defenders at Tirad Pass remained focused on the enemy in front of them, unaware of the movement unfolding behind their lines. And for a moment, it seemed like they might actually succeed, holding the line just long enough to fulfill their mission. Then everything changed. The rhythm of the battle shattered in an instant as something unexpected broke through the defenders' control. Shots rang out from behind, sudden and violent, catching the defenders off guard as gunfire erupted where there should have been none. Confusion spread instantly, soldiers turning in every direction, trying to understand how the enemy had reached them. At Tirad Pass, the defenders who once held the high ground suddenly found themselves exposed, their position no longer secure. The enemy had reached a vantage point above them, a devastating reversal, turning what had once been their greatest advantage against them. Panic threatened to break their formation, the line beginning to falter under the shock of the unexpected assault. But Gregorio del Pilar acted quickly, moving through the chaos and trying to reorganize his men before everything collapsed. He knew retreat was no longer an option. The only path left was forward, as the battle intensified and the defenders fought desperately on two fronts. Despite the overwhelming odds, the Filipino soldiers didn't break, standing firm as the battle raged around them with relentless force. They fought with everything they had, every bullet fired, every ounce of strength pushed to its limit in the face of certain danger. At Tirad Pass, the narrow pass became a storm of gunfire and smoke, the air thick with chaos and violence. Men fell on the rugged ground, but the line held as long as it could, each soldier refusing to give in despite the losses. Gregorio del Pilar, refusing to step back, continued to lead from the front, sharing the same danger as his men. He knew the end was near, but he also understood they had already achieved something extraordinary against impossible odds. They had delayed the enemy far longer than anyone expected, turning what should have been a swift defeat into a powerful stand. Every minute they held bought Emilio Aguinaldo more time, and that time was everything. In the midst of the chaos, the battlefield roared with gunfire and smoke, every movement blurred by the intensity of the fight. Then a single shot rang out, sharp, sudden, and in that instant everything changed. Gregorio del Pilar was struck, the young general collapsing onto the ground he had sworn to defend. For a brief moment it felt as though time itself had paused, the chaos fading into a distant echo around his fallen figure. The men saw it. Their leader, the one who had guided and inspired them, was gone, and the weight of that loss hit instantly. And yet, the fighting didn't stop, as the soldiers held their ground and continued to resist with everything they had. They fought not just because they were ordered to, but because of the example he had set, his courage living on through them. Even in death, his presence remained, carried forward in every shot fired and every moment they refused to yield. One by one, the defenders were overwhelmed, their numbers dwindling as the pressure from all sides became impossible to hold back. The flanking attack had sealed their fate, closing in from above and behind, leaving no path to escape. And yet, they didn't surrender. They stood firm, refusing to give in even as the odds closed in around them. They didn't run. At Tirad Pass, they held their ground until the very end, choosing resistance over retreat. The final moments of the battle unfolded in a blur of smoke, movement, and unyielding defiance. When it was over, silence returned to the mountains, the battlefield left still and heavy with what had just taken place. The American forces, now in control of the pass, paused to take in the scene before them, recognizing the weight of what they had faced. They had encountered a force that refused to break, even in the face of certain defeat, and that defiance left a lasting impression. And while the battle itself ended in loss, its impact stretched far beyond the mountains, echoing through history long after the fighting had stopped. The significance of what happened there reached beyond the battlefield, turning a single stand into something far greater. Emilio Aguinaldo had escaped, continuing the fight because of the time that had been bought. The delay had worked, every moment held at the pass proving to be crucial in preserving the resistance. The mission, impossible as it seemed, had been accomplished at Tirad Pass, where sacrifice turned into purpose. Tirad Pass became more than just a battlefield, it became a symbol etched into history. It stood as a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, courage could rise above fear and impossibility. And in the end, that courage proved powerful enough to change the course of history. The story of Tirad Pass spread far beyond the mountains, carried by those who understood its true significance. It wasn't just about strategy or numbers. It was about sacrifice, about the willingness to stand firm even when the outcome was already certain. Gregorio del Pilar, at just 24 years old, made a decision that would define him forever, choosing duty over survival. And through that decision, he became more than a general. He became a lasting symbol of resistance. Today, Tirad Pass stands as a quiet reminder of that day, the mountains unchanged as they watch over where courage and sacrifice once shaped history. Visitors who stand there can almost feel it, the weight of what happened, the distant echoes of gunfire, and the determination that refused to fade. It's a place where the past feels close, where the story still lives on in the silence of the mountains. And that's why this story matters, because it reminds us that true strength isn't measured by numbers, but by what you're willing to stand for. If this story gave you chills, let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what part hit you the hardest? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this, because history like this deserves to be remembered, retold, and never forgotten.